had like a long battle against depression for over a decade.
Why'd you decide to join the show?
I think like for me, representation is also very important.
I could call it racism, I could call it discrimination. I don't think it matters what we really call it. It was tough, but at the same time, it sort of made me who I am today. I had to work a lot harder than the rest of the people that was around me, but I don't think it was a bad thing.
Not everyone may be ready to talk about their something so personal and something so vulnerable. How will like the things that I post, the things that I advocate for personally would affect the image also of the company because you're also representing that. So like how would you balance that?
Welcome to Raw with Uma, and I'm Uma, your host and architect of Raw Leadership, here to bring you unfiltered, unrehearsed, unscripted conversations with women about what really goes on in navigating life and work. Are you ready? Let's get raw. My guest today is Nicole. Welcome, Nicole.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. We're here in Singapore, and you and I have just met outside the studio.
In person, it's the first time. Yeah.
Yes. Have you met before?
No.
Okay.
On LinkedIn. But everyone nowadays, on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have you. And I don't know what you're going to ask me today, so this is completely unscripted. So let's start with a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? A little bit about you, and why'd you decide to join the show?
Okay, so I'm originally from the Philippines. I transferred to Singapore a little over 2 years ago. I work for McCann World Group. We're an advertising agency, a full-service agency, but I've been with McCann for over 5 years already. I started with the Philippine team. So currently, I'm the Director of HR and Communications for Singapore and Hong Kong, and I'm the Regional DEI Lead for APAC.
Okay.
Outside of work, I am a performer. Like I dance and I sing.
Wow.
Not professionally. Maybe growing up, it was like a thing. But like I think like on a more personal note, I advocate a lot for inclusion and mental health because that's also like something that's also very personal to me.
Okay, I look forward to learning more.
Yeah.
Why'd you decide to join the show?
I think like for me, representation is also very important. Like as a woman, and even like for my age, when I started working, I was working in a telco, which was predominantly a male industry. Like like as a fresh grad and as a woman, it was always like a struggle to be heard. How do you get the same type of respect? And I think like I had to go through and overcome those challenges to get to where I am now. And, like people would always ask me, how come you're so confident? But it didn't get there overnight, right? Like, it was a lot of things and experiences over the years. And I think like being here, I totally like believe with what you are advocating for as well. And hopefully like, like being part of the show can also add to the voice that's speaking up about women representation.
I'm very sure you are. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Let's start with your question.
Okay, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. So I think like this is like quite relevant, and a lot of like I have like a lot of people who are asking me the same thing, and I'd want to get your perspective on it. So I think my question is like, how do you build up on personal branding, on your personal brand, in a way that's authentic and vulnerable at the same time, but with the balance of being professional and having that positive image still? It's a very tricky question.
It's a big question. Okay, so let's break it down. LinkedIn is obviously a great platform for anyone in the workplace. Previously known as a platform to find jobs, but today is a platform for content creators like myself. And there's 1 billion users on LinkedIn. Only 1% are true content creators. Actually, only a subset of that are true content creators. And I actually got my top voice in 2020 because of the work that I do for gender equity. And I get a lot of questions about, oh, how do you get the blue badge? And I'm like, well, I never thought about getting a blue badge. I just put out there what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
But I think just for everyone who's trying to choose a platform to lend your voice to, I think the first question is, where is your audience hanging out? And so I'm choosing LinkedIn because my audience is men and women in the workplace, parents of girls, etc. So I mainly give most of my energy on LinkedIn because I think some people try to choose multiple platforms. So I think like if you want to choose your platform, the question is, where is your audience hanging out? That's the first question. Then the second question is, the second thing I think about, at least in my own journey, is just letting everyone out there who might be wanting to put their voice on LinkedIn is I still, think about, do I really press the post button after I've written this? I just wrote a post this morning about unconscious bias. So
I read that.
I still get that feeling today because I'm like, should I really tell this story and should I really put it out there? And the guiding question that has helped me is really anyone out there who wants what's best for me will want the best for me and will do what's best for me.
Okay.
And everything and everyone else is just noise.
It's a good perspective.
And so I put a conversation out there to create a dialogue because I know that my story is reflective of other underrepresented minorities. I obviously focus on women in Asia. And I know I'm not alone in the situations that I talk about. So I put it out there to create a dialogue. And it's always heartening to see men come in and have those conversations and ask questions, because I think the first step to change is curiosity. So I think like being clear about why you want to write what you want to write. I see a lot of content creators who are writing for the sake of
the likes,
the spotlight on them. And I think we are also intelligent today that we don't spend more than 1,000 milliseconds, which is LinkedIn's measurement for an impression on a post, right? We move on quickly based on the first sentence. So I think understanding your why
that's very
in the
important.
first place, I think is super important. And my why, and that's personal to me. And what's personal to you, I'd love to understand why you write your content. Is I'm there to serve, I'm there to build curiosity, I'm there to encourage debates and dialogue.
I think like that's very important. I always say that also, right? Like having a clear why is very, very important. Why do you do what you do? Like even when we evaluate the jobs that we're in, asking why am I doing what I'm doing? Is it for the money? Is it for the fame, the position? And I think even with content creation, that's very important. Like to me, like my purpose in life has always been to help people. And that is aligned with the content that I post, my job, and even like the things that I do outside of work. Like I had like a long battle against depression for over a decade. And most people didn't know about it because it was only maybe at the last year that I started talking about it. Even my parents didn't know about it. Some of my, I guess like most engaged post on LinkedIn was when I talked about my mental health journey. But I also need to balance when I talk about it. Like timing is also important, and why I talk about it. Like a lot of us have had like our personal stories, and I think like it's not everyone may be ready to talk about their something so personal and something so vulnerable. Because you also don't know how, people will reach out to you afterwards, and maybe you're not ready for what they will ask you or what they will tell you after you post these things. So,
And I think there's no obligation there. And it's important to be kind to yourself. I mean, I have been beating myself up because I can't keep up with all the DMs that I get, you know, and I tried for 1 week and it takes 3 hours of my time and it's just not realistic for me.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to have to be okay not to respond to messages or to get to all of them. The professional part to your question, right? Like when you write something like that, which is so personal, and I applaud your courage to do that, because there are many others who go like, oh my gosh, like I'm in the same boat and I'm not alone. I think that is the biggest gift that you can give somebody else who's reading about your story. I think the professional aspect, because LinkedIn is for professionals, is how do you always just tie it back to the workplace?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, just rounding it off in that way, that you're not there to rant for the sake of the spotlight on yourself. You're not there because you're trying to sell something, you know, solicitation. So I think the authenticity of it. And then people always look for, well, what's the key takeaways and what can I learn from this?
Yeah.
So if you went through that, you know, what was the first point of when you said to yourself, oh my gosh, I am going through something, you know, so that it's useful for other people, right? To your point, you want to help other people. That's why you're putting it out there.
No, that's true. And I think like, you know, like inside and outside of the workplace, that's why I continued to talk about it. Because it took a lot of courage. It was not easy. Like I grew up like wanting to have that perfect image. And a lot of Asian women can relate to that. Like we all have to be like good in school, good in everything that we're doing, despite the multiple hats that we need to, you know, to have. And I think like for me, when I saw like, okay, like talking about my life story, because most people like, if you would just like look at my resume, look at what's like the positions I've held, how quickly I climbed up the career ladder, people would sometimes say that, oh, you're just one of those lucky ones.
Yes.
But there's a story behind that. And so like when I started talking about, okay, like behind all those achievements, there's this other story that most people do not see. And like people will suddenly like come up to you and like, oh, you're human too. You're actually like a person who makes mistakes, who would also like sometimes have to fail. And I think like, you know, like having that platform is very important. But maybe like I have like another question, right? Because some of like myself, like even if we do content creation, we also have full-time jobs.
Yes.
So like I think like for me it's always like conscious, like, okay, how will like the things that I post, the things that I advocate for personally would affect the image also of the company, because you're also representing that. So like how would you balance that also, and what advice would you give to people who, you know, who want to have their voice heard but doesn't want to like really risk the image of their company or like their state in their company as well?
Yeah, that is a fine line. I get this question a lot. And I think if you can somehow at the start, as you are building the content and wanting to be more vulnerable in sharing your personal experiences. Like I spoke to a woman who asked me the same question, and she's around the same type of work that you do as well, and for a big multinational. And she said, look, I really want to talk about this stuff, but I really don't want company X to, you know, and my colleagues, etc., to read that and go, oh, geez, you know, really, you know, whatever, insert comment. I think it's always good in the beginning to relate it back to how that is addressed in the company. So, for example, if your company is, hopefully, a champion of mental health, right? So you can put your personal story out there, but you're rounding it off to, okay, what does it mean as a woman in the workplace, as a woman who's a DI leader, and then, by the way, my company, et cetera, right? So there's a win-win scenario. So I think in the early stages, it's good to have a win-win story. I do want to pick up on a couple of things you said earlier.
Sure.
As Asian women growing up, and how we are told to perhaps listen more than we speak, to always be the good girl. My friend would say that there's multiple work for women. There's the work that we do in the office. There's the housework. There's the beauty work. There's all this work that we actually have to do. And it's actually, it's not that we feel we have to look good. So, as I matured anyway, I only wore pants for the first 12 years of my career because that's all I saw around me. People wearing pants. So I guess I should wear pants. I wasn't comfortable in my body. I didn't like what I saw in the mirror. It was only in my 30s did I try and figure out, okay, what suits me versus what I think looks good, and, just really accepting my body and who I am and how I feel about myself, which then I think comes out just very differently energy-wise. But that's a very long journey, especially for a woman, and especially in Asia, right? I was a dark-skinned girl in Malaysia, fourth generation Sri Lankan, but, I didn't get any attention from boys because I was darker, right? So my lighter skinned friends would get attention, and I'd be like, wow, that is a huge confidence hit, right? So I think we all have these stories, and they are important, and we should tell them, because girls today and women coming into the workplaces as their first jobs, they're not navigating a world that's any different. In fact, they're navigating a world that is more judgmental.
It's true.
Potentially. I wanted to pick up on the other thing that you were saying on why, people say that when women appear to progress or achieve something, that they are lucky.
Yeah.
And that's the prove it again bias in the workplace, because women more often than not are judged on performance, but men on potential, right? So I see your potential. So yeah, of course you should negotiate for that pay. I expect you to be aggressive because you're a man, you are the breadwinner. That's the first, this is unconscious bias, right? But as women, if we are as successful, usually we have to choose between being liked or respected. Men, as they get more successful, are both liked and respected. And so this tightrope that we walk in is like, oh yeah, I bet she was lucky. Or, oh, I bet she knew somebody. I bet she had a lot of help. And then we perpetuate that by going, like when we receive a compliment, it's like, no, it was a teamwork. Like, it's so hard for us to receive credit. Like, do you experience that?
Yeah, like, I mean, like, I do a workshop on I Am Remarkable, which is like self-promotion, really. And I've seen, like, even the most successful women, and even myself, like, sometimes I would still struggle with that. And it's a real problem, a real issue. And, like, again, like, something you cannot really resolve overnight, because it's like something we went through most of our lives.
Yes. Have you found a hack for it?
I think, like, for me, like I always say, maybe it was experience also. I'm in my early 30s, and sometimes, like, people will say, like, when you start talking, you feel like you're much older. But I said, like, because I had to be that. It comes with the role. For me to get that respect, I need to, like, have my presence felt, in a sense that when I talk, you listen to me. Like, being assertive is something that you have to continuously hone. I'm also highly self-aware. I'm very perceptive of the people around me. But I think, like, that's, like, how I tried navigating through, these complexities on how I want to be heard. And if I have, like, a point, I will fight for it.
Yeah. And then you're most likely going to be penalized for it, because you are expected to be warm, to be soft-spoken, to be the motherly figure. So anytime we go against that, it's cognitive dissonance. It's like, oh, it doesn't match what I expect you to show up as. So then you are penalized for it. So I like this formula that I use, and I call it gender judo, which is 80% of the time I am going to show up as the warm, caring listener. Insert your favorite female-led adjective for leadership. so that 20% of the time where I actually need to step into, like, sorry, here's the decision we're going to make.
Yeah.
And see, I just said sorry. I just caught myself saying sorry, which is another overused word by women. It's like, I'm going to make this decision. You may not like it, but we're going to move forward.
Yeah.
And that's, masculine, right?
Yeah.
In the way it's delivered. So 20% of the time when I do that, I'm not going to be penalized because 80% of the time I'm showing up as you think a woman should show up. I'm not compromising myself. It is how I am. But that's kind of the gender judo. I do have a sensitive question to ask you because I know that when I grew up in Johor Bahru, which is a city across from Singapore in Malaysia, my parents were very specific about speaking good English, that they stopped me and my sister and, some of my cousins as well, from continuing to learn how to read and write in Tamil. And so it was so bad that our grandparents, I remember my two grandmothers, they had to learn to speak English to communicate to us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because my parents, they were just very particular that we should speak good English, which is why I don't have an accent.
Yeah.
And so it is quite odd, because I have a very long surname, as all Sri Lankans do. And when I show up to a global call or etc., and I speak like this, people are usually surprised. Now, we have people all over the world watching this show. And in Singapore, a majority of foreign domestic workers are from the Philippines.
Yeah.
You are very clearly from the Philippines, right? I wonder what you had to face and what battles you had to overcome in showing up as a successful woman in the workplace here.
I think that's a very, very good question. Like in terms of speaking in English, because I think growing up, most of our subjects in the Philippines are taught in English. You only have one Filipino subject. So most of us are very, very fluent. It comes naturally. But I think something that I faced even in my own country, similar to you, was being morena, as we call it, or being tan. And we're living in a tropical country, but growing up, I would have friends who would tell me that, you would be prettier, or if you're whiter, and you can have all these whitening products, and you would grow insecure about it. Can I not be successful? Can I not be beautiful also with my skin color? And it's only when I started traveling a lot that I realized that the world is bigger than my very, very small bubble. And I still get, say, when I go to Europe or the States, unless they hear me talk, if it's just looking at me, you would get discriminated, oh, you're probably you're poor, or you're, you're just probably here looking for a husband, things like that. If you're with a foreigner and stuff, but I mean, I have to also show that no, I'm actually successful on my own. I don't need a man. I don't need someone from another nationality, for instance, who to make me be successful. I've worked hard to get to where I am now. And, now I've grown to love myself more and more. When I travel, I would have people come up to me and tell me, is your skin natural? Because you're so beautiful and I want that too.
Yes.
And you realize that, I wish I was appreciated the same way when I was growing up, because I am beautiful in my own way. And that's something that I hope more women, even little girls, could have also. I hope it will progress eventually.
Oh God, I hope so too. Yeah. Thank you. It was great to have you on the show, Nicole. And I loved our conversation today. My co-host today is going to have a lot to say about being a minority, about personal branding. So I'm sure you're going to gain from
I'm looking
his
forward
insights.
to hearing his insights as well.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
For those of you who follow me on Instagram, 90% of my photos have food in them. I went first to Cloudstreet, one of my top 3 favorite restaurants in Singapore in 2020. And that's where I met Chef Rishi Nalindra and his wife, Manuela. He was then generous enough to give me a once-in-a-lifetime experience during the pandemic with other women advocates at my house when he came to cook for us. And that's when we got a front seat preview to his other successful restaurant, Kotua. Thank goodness we have a real Sri Lankan restaurant in Singapore, finally. Rishi was born into a family of foodies. Cloudstreet was a game-changing experience for me. It speaks to Rishi's flair for dissecting ingredients, especially Asian ingredients and techniques. He's been creating what he humbly calls a very logical combination of flavors, textures, and aesthetics that strike a fine balance in a much vaunted dishes which have received numerous accolades. With 2 Michelin stars to his name, Rishi knows what it takes to rise to the top of your game by being authentic to yourself and taking inspiration from what you see around you. And for that reason, I have invited him to the show. So Rishi, a big welcome to Raw with Uma.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it's amazing to see myself on the other side for a change.
Yeah.
So I was really excited when you asked me to join you. I was surprised. And at the same time, I was very glad.
Yeah, hopefully by the end of the show, you know why I asked you. Rishi, you and I share a Sri Lankan background. I do want the viewers to hear your story about what it means to be a Sri Lankan.
I've always been very thankful for being Sri Lankan. And over the years, especially that I've lived almost for 4 decades now. And even myself being Sri Lankan and what it means has changed over the years. I was born into a civil unrest, and also the revolution was happening at the same time with the socialist movement in the country.
Yeah.
And growing up, knowing what's not going to happen the next day, waking up to surprises. And also we were divided in so many ways, not just being rich or poor racially, religiously. And there's so many things we could take away from it and have so much resentment towards being Sri Lankan. But I think I've come out from the other side. And it's interesting. You come from a full Tamil background, and I come from a very Sinhalese Buddhist background. And for us to have the conversations that we've had over the last 4 years since we first met and coming to your place and cooking and things like that has shown me so much as being Sri Lankan is not being a race or in being in a particular religion. Being Sri Lankan is having that love and passion for the place we were born or we are really belong to. It's unreal to explain to someone. I've been out of Sri Lanka for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And my home always been where my work is. But you miss belonging somewhere. And that's a hard feeling to explain. So I've learned over the years to be Sri Lankan in a very different way from how I grew up.
Yeah, I love
that. If it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 4th generation, so, I'm quite separated from it until I grew up to be more curious about my heritage. And then I went back to just visit, quite a few times, etc. And I am more connected to Sri Lanka now than I have ever been, but I think that's just part of emotional maturity and growing up and trying to figure out your roots and heritage and where you come from and how you honor your ancestors who are, invisibly behind you.
I mean, it's so true. Like, for us, we have certain habits being Sri Lankan. And sometimes you wonder where that comes from. And then you trace back, you're like, our ancestors has been doing these things for years. And certain DNA to change, it takes thousands of years.
Yeah.
So we're still fresh in this.
Yes. You deliver amazing food. I eat a lot. And I'm very particular. And I love the level of detail and attention that you bring into your work and everything that you do, because I've seen you in the kitchen, including my own kitchen. And today in that conversation with Nicole, the question around showing up authentically and building your brand. What was that like for you? What did you learn? And if you had any advice for anyone
I mean, it was
out
so
there.
interesting to listen to Nicole and you because I think it doesn't matter the gender at a certain point, especially coming from an ethnic background. I moved to Australia when I was 18, and especially the fine dining kitchens I worked at. It was most of the kitchens, I was the only brown person. There was a restaurant that I worked at. It had been there for 20, 25 years. And I was the first brown person to be in that kitchen. And I did face different challenges for sure. And I could call it racism. I could call it discrimination. I don't think it matters what we really call it. It was tough, but at the same time, it sort of made me who I am today. And like I said, it's an experience. I don't count it as a bad experience because that's when the negativity starts in your mind. And going on a spiral of that negative thought, it breaks you. And it's so hard sometimes to come back out of it. So I really worked I genuinely think I had to work a lot harder than the rest of the people that was around me. But I don't think it was a bad thing. I could see that then it goes past a point, people can't ignore you.
Yeah.
You here, you have arrived. But it's a self-confidence thing as well, because the last thing I wanted to do was cook Sri Lankan food. Because when I first started cooking, everyone kept asking me to cook Sri Lankan food. And I said, no, my grandma did it, my mom did it, and she still does it, and she does it way better than I ever could. Why would I do something? Then I take my identity out. That's how Cloudstreet was born, or Cheek by Jowl happened. Because that's the food I wanted to cook. It was not Western food. It was not Asian food. It didn't have an identity. It was me building my own identity. But for me to really appreciate who I am, where I come from, and be really like confident in myself, I genuinely think it took me almost 39 years. But it's something you build slowly. It's not, you have to work towards it. It doesn't happen overnight. Even Nicole was saying it's the same thing. You have to build it. You have to make a conscious effort to make sure you build yourself up to that. And not even just ladies, like even for men, that self-image, especially when you come from an ethnic background, you're fighting.
Yeah.
And of course, sometimes we forget it's even harder for women.
Yeah.
And because not only every struggle that you two were mentioning, I've gone through it, I've faced it. But then, do I have an upper hand sometimes being a male? I think so. And it's a conversation that never happened. It's like it's happening now. Again, those little changes will take so long because we forget how long it takes for us to evolve from being who we are.
Yeah. Just picking up on your thought about the fighting piece, right? Because I think anyone who is underrepresented in the environment that they are in, you do paddle a lot harder. And you do feel like you have to fight for your very existence and for people to see you and hear you and appreciate what you're doing. One of the best stories I heard from Sheryl Sandberg, who wrote the book Lean In, and this lady called Deborah Liu, who's now the CEO of Ancestry, the DNA company. And I happened to meet Deb, and she told me the story, which she's spoken about publicly, where she was working for Sheryl at Meta. And they come out of a meeting where it didn't go well. And Deb is a Chinese growing up in America. And she felt she had to fight really hard. So in that meeting, she was still showing up as if she was fighting really hard. And so after the meeting, Sheryl took her aside and said, "You can stop fighting now." Did you ever have that moment where you
100%.
felt? Yeah. When was that?
I think getting 2 stars.
Yeah.
That was the call. My life goal was to get 2 stars, not 3, not 1, 2. Even when we first received our first Michelin star for Cheek by Jowl, and I closed. It was a very financially stable business. It was still thriving. Had an amazing team, and I closed it because I knew I would never get 2 stars for Cheek by Jowl. And then I took a massive risk 5 years ago and opened Cloudstreet, but I was still out there to prove myself to others. And I mean, you met me. I love a good drink.
Yeah.
I love to eat. And I still remember the day I got my second star. I didn't drink. I couldn't eat. I didn't eat. I felt so content for the first time in my life. I felt like I did what I set my life to achieve. And I stopped fighting. To be honest, I think I stopped fighting probably 1.5 years, 2 years before that. Probably 1.5 years. And especially with COVID and what was happening, fighting was not an option. You sort of had to be yourself. And Couture was born through that. And I was fine to cook Sri Lankan food.
Yeah.
And because all of a sudden then you realize rather than just fighting, you need to start making sense commercially, like financially, and even with your emotional balance with things. And then you start doing what's really necessary in life. You forget everything else. But achieving 2 stars was the day I think I completely stopped fighting. And I'm like, I felt like I proved myself, not in a bad way, but I genuinely think that's the day I stopped fighting.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that I'm any less ambitious than I was before that day. I think I'm a lot more ambitious and I have a lot more plan in my head to achieve, but I'm not here to fight. I'm going to float now. I've been paddling really hard, but I'm enjoying floating. And even Nicole brought up like women having to be warmer and having to be soft-spoken. And it's something I've practiced the last 3 years because I think it doesn't matter what gender you are from now. We're dealing with a very different generation. And they want aggressive mentors. Achieving up until that point, I was very aggressive towards myself, towards the people that I was around me, and I worked with my wife, and people had put up with me for such a long time, and I really felt like it's my time to change and give it back to them. And I had to be soft-spoken. I had to be a lot warmer. And I think I always was. But then when you're fighting, you forget what's really important. And you don't see more than yourself. And at a certain point, you're like, actually, especially when you grow as a team, from 6 people at Cheek by Jowl, we have around 90 staff now. And you're like, I'm the least important person in this company. And up to date, I haven't changed my habits of walking into the restaurant. I first go say hello to the stewards. We lose the dishwashing area in a restaurant, you're done. And I always start from them and I say hello to every single person. And that all happened because I actually really stopped fighting.
I love the going from fighting to floating. And the important part about that is you're not less ambitious. I think you become more ambitious. It's certainly true for me too. But a whole different universe opens up when you stop fighting.
You start seeing things that you never saw. And you see beyond yourself. And again, everything that you expect others to bring to you, happiness or anything, you start finding within. And I think that's the biggest change.
If you had one tip about not allowing yourself to spiral, if you are in an environment as the first, the only, let's say, which you and I have been many times, not allowing yourself to spiral down that rabbit hole, what hack did you use or learn that was useful that we could put it out there for anyone who's watching this to use?
So one thing has really, really worked for me when I've had really tough days. I left home when I was 18 and I had $600 and that might be the last time I got funding from my parents. So from that $600 to get to where I am today, I think I've seen some really tough days and I've hit rock bottom. And one thing always has worked for me, sleep. I don't know, when I'm really, really stressed, I could take a 15-minute nap and I'll wake up thinking, okay, I'll do what I have to do now. And one thing has carried me over the years is music. Music, it's I'd rather go on a rabbit hole with music for 2 hours if I have to. And rather than the problem I have, because if you go in a rabbit hole with a problem, you'll never come up with solutions. Sometimes I think what I meant by napping, or what it means for me to have a nap, is just purely stop. Just stop. You're not seeing the solution. And it's amazing. I always have this idea in my head. There are images that you look at. It has so many little pictures on it. But then when you take a step back and look at it, you see one big image. And that's life. When you're in that panic, you start looking at million little things. You stop, you take a step back, then you see a bigger image within those millions of images. And that's life. And you stop fighting that big image because you can see it. I think that's what I meant by having a nap. Just stop. It could be a nap. It could be watching a short film. It could be going for a walk. It could be, as long as it's not a bad habit. I think it has to work, because I think you just need to find a way to stop. Because there's nothing worse than not being able to stop. So I have conversations with myself a lot. And also I'm getting to a stage where all my friends, we're all turning 40. And I can see some of them are struggling with the idea of being 40. And I'm looking forward to my 40s. And I was talking to myself, if someone asked me what's changed, my answer would be, and it was, for the last 40 years, I always felt like life had a grip on me. But for the first time, I feel like I have a grip on life. I'm still working on it. There's so many mistakes I still do, and there's so much I want to change as a human being, as a leader, as a boss, as a friend, as a husband. But I'm not fighting any of those things, because I know myself a lot better. So I'm really looking forward to being in my 40s, if it makes sense.
Oh, for sure. As someone in the 40s, I can assure you, I'm having the best time of my life. And I think the 50s are going to be even more rocking and
I
better.
think so.
Yeah. I love that. And to end the show, Rishi, if you could give one advice to anyone out there who is struggling to believe that their voice should be heard, and they should be seen as they are thinking about their personal brand. Because I want to bring this back to the workplace. A lot of people's identities are tied to the job title. And so the separation from that and knowing who you are and then what you stand for, the character versus the reputation, what people think of you, is so important. If you had one tip on how to get started on that journey, what would that be?
Timing. I think Nicole brought it up. Timing is everything in life, especially when you want the brand to be yourself, when you want to be heard for who you are, not something that's made up by society, or not something even that you made up. Timing. Imagine if I speak the way I speak 15 years ago as a young cook in a kitchen. People would have looked at me and say, dreamer. And I think at a workplace, always the focus never should be about self-image or brand. It should be work. It should be skill. Uma, we both are sitting here coming from minorities because of our skills. I'm sure you would have felt it at one point. People don't see you as Uma. They see you as what you do and your skill set. And I think that's the most important thing. Sharpen your skills. And you'll get to an age at one point you're so comfortable with yourself, and that will eventually start building yourself. And time it. Time it when you want to be heard, and time when you want to speak.
Yeah. And I think that timing and the time to get there very much speaks to your character.
100%.
who you have become, and how you feel about yourself inside. And I think that ultimately is what the identity that you carry forward versus the other titles, etc., that is placed upon you.
100%, because once you build that image for yourself, you can't change it.
Yeah.
It's not clothes.
It's
It's
not.
a skin that you're going to wear for the rest of your life. So you have to be very sure of it and patience and timing.
Thank you, Rishi. I loved our conversation today and so much insights, and it was great to have you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
If you're hearing this message, you've listened to a new episode all the way to the end. And for that, I thank you for the generosity of your time. To wrap up, here are a few points from this episode. We talked about how to show up authentically as part of your brand and your identity. And you heard from both Nicole and Rishi today that it takes time. It takes a bit of suffering. It takes you going through that challenge. It takes patience to be able to build that character and really be able to think about that identity that separates yourself from everything else. And you heard a lot of great tips from Nicole's story and Rishi's story today. So I'm curious to hear from you. What else did you take away from this conversation today? I'd love to hear what you think. So please follow, like, and leave a comment, and I promise to read all of them. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, check out the link below to send in your details. See you next week.